The deafening silence blankets first class as Victoria Winter's palm connects with Elijah Montgomery's face, the sharp crack echoing through the cabin. "Know your place," she hisses, her blue eyes glacial with contempt. Elijah's hand trembles as he touches his burning cheek, stunned by the unprovoked assault. Neither notices the man in seat 2A lowering his Wall Street Journal, Marcus Montgomery Sr., whose empire spans continents. The billionaire's eyes narrow, witnessing the flight attendant's casual racism toward his son. He reaches for his phone, voice deadly calm. "Get me everything on Victoria Winters. Will justice be served, or will privilege and prejudice prevail?" Before we begin this shocking story, let me know where you're watching from, and if you believe in standing up for justice and equality, hit that like and subscribe button to stay updated on more eye-opening stories of courage against discrimination. Elijah Montgomery gripped his carry-on bag tightly as he navigated through Atlanta's busy terminal. At 23, the Harvard Business School graduate carried himself with quiet confidence, his tailored charcoal suit a stark contrast to the casual Friday attire of other travelers. Despite being the son of tech billionaire Marcus Montgomery Sr., Elijah insisted on flying commercial instead of using the family's private jet. "You'll understand the world better from economy class than from a Gulfstream," his father always said. Marcus had built Montgomery Innovations from a garage startup to a global tech empire worth over $40 billion. As a black entrepreneur who faced countless barriers, Marcus instilled in his children the importance of earning their own success. "I can give you opportunity," he often told Elijah, "but respect is something you earn yourself." This philosophy led Elijah to accept an entry-level position at a venture capital firm in San Francisco, refusing special treatment despite his family name. Today, Elijah was finally upgrading to first class, a small reward he had bought himself after securing his firm's first major acquisition deal. What should have been a moment of pride was quickly dampened when he approached the priority boarding line. "Sir, this line is for first class and priority members only," the gate agent said skeptically, eyeing his Rolex watch as if questioning its authenticity. "I'm aware," Elijah replied politely, presenting his boarding pass. The agent's expression shifted from suspicion to forced politeness as she verified his ticket. It was a familiar dance Elijah had experienced his entire life, the initial assumption that he didn't belong, followed by the awkward realization of prejudice. Meanwhile, at the front of the aircraft, Victoria Winters prepared the first-class cabin with practiced efficiency. At 34, the senior flight attendant took pride in her 15 years with Sky National Airlines. Her perfectly coiffed blonde hair and immaculate uniform gave her an air of authority she wielded like a weapon. What passengers didn't see was how Victoria's warm smile toward certain customers could transform into cold disdain for others, particularly those with darker skin. "Vicky, darling, incredible news!" Richard Whitmore's voice boomed through her earpiece. As Sky National's operations director, Richard had taken Victoria under his wing years ago, seeing in her a reflection of his own carefully constructed public persona. "I've put in the recommendation for the senior purser position." The committee seemed quite receptive. Victoria beamed. After years of waiting, her career was finally advancing. "Thank you, Richard. I won't let you down." "I know you won't. Just make sure today's flight is flawless. We've got some VIPs on board. The Montgomery party is in 2A and B." Richard's voice dropped to a whisper. "You know, the tech billionaire. Treat him well. Though between us, these new money types need to be shown proper etiquette sometimes." Victoria nodded, even though Richard couldn't see her. Their shared understanding of who deserved respect had cemented their friendship over countless staff parties and closed-door meetings where minorities were passed over for promotions. What neither of them knew was that Marcus Montgomery had carefully documented every interaction with Sky National over the past year. As one of the airline's largest corporate clients, he had noticed disturbing patterns in how his employees of color were treated. Today's flight was part of his broader investigation, though he hadn't expected his son to become directly involved. As boarding began, Marcus took his seat in 2A, intentionally dressing down in a casual sweater and jeans. He nodded politely to Victoria, who offered him champagne with her warmest smile, noting his expensive watch and presumed status. When Elijah approached minutes later, Victoria's expression instantly hardened. "Excuse me, I think you're in the wrong section," she said curtly before Elijah could even speak. "I'm in 2B, Elijah replied, showing his boarding pass. Victoria examined it with obvious suspicion. "Very well," she said, making no attempt to help with his luggage or offer the champagne that had been readily extended to other first-class passengers. Marcus watched this interaction silently from behind his newspaper, his jaw tightening as he witnessed the microaggression his son had described countless times before. Today, however, would prove to be far more than a simple case of poor service. Neither father nor son could have anticipated how quickly a routine flight would escalate into a national controversy that would shake an entire industry. The Sky National flight from Atlanta to San Francisco was scheduled to take just over 5 hours. For most passengers, it would be a forgettable journey. For Elijah Montgomery, it would become the most public confrontation with racism he had ever experienced. 30 minutes after takeoff, Victoria Winters had served drinks to every first-class passenger except Elijah. When he politely raised his hand to request service, she breezed past with a practiced, "I'll be right with you," that never materialized. Meanwhile, she refilled the white businessman across the aisle twice, engaging in cheerful conversation about his golf trip. "Excuse me," Elijah tried again after waiting 15 minutes. "Could I get some water, please?" Victoria's eyes narrowed slightly. "We're quite busy with turbulence preparations. You'll have to wait." The flight was smooth, with the seatbelt sign already turned off. Elijah glanced at his father, who gave an almost imperceptible nod, encouraging patience. Marcus Montgomery had built an empire by knowing when to speak and when to observe. This was a moment for observation. An hour into the flight, lunch service began. Victoria placed a warmed towel and menu in front of each first-class passenger, deliberately skipping Elijah. When he quietly mentioned the oversight, she responded loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear. "These amenities are for first-class passengers only." "I am in first class," Elijah replied, maintaining his composure. "Seat 2B. Victoria glanced at the seat number with feigned surprise. "Well, there seems to be some mix-up with the manifest. I'll check on that." She never returned with his menu. When meal service began, Elijah was served last, his food cold and his request for wine met with, "I'll need to see ID. We're very strict about serving alcohol." No other passenger had been carded. The situation escalated when Victoria noticed the luxury amenity kit on Elijah's tray table, the same kit distributed to all first-class passengers before takeoff. She immediately approached, voice sharp with accusation. "Sir, where did you get that amenity kit? Those are exclusively for our premium customers." The cabin grew quiet as heads turned toward the confrontation. Elijah kept his voice level, aware of the attention. "It was on my seat when I boarded like everyone else's." "I highly doubt that," Victoria retorted. "Mrs. Henderson in 3C reported her kit missing. I need to take this back." As she reached for the kit, Elijah placed his hand over it. "This is mine, given to me as a first-class passenger. If there's a missing kit, perhaps you should check elsewhere." Victoria's face flushed with anger. "Are you suggesting I'm not doing my job properly? Let me see your boarding pass again." Elijah calmly produced his phone with the electronic boarding pass. Victoria snatched it, scrutinizing it as if looking for forgery. Her lips pursed tightly. This seat was upgraded. Last minute, there must have been a system error. These kits are worth over $100, and we've had issues with theft on these routes. The implication hung heavily in the air. A white woman across the aisle gasped softly, while an elderly man 2 rows up shook his head in disgust, though whether at Elijah or Victoria wasn't immediately clear. "I did not steal anything," Elijah stated firmly. "I purchased this seat. I am entitled to the same service as everyone else, and I would appreciate being treated with respect." "Don't you dare speak to me about respect," Victoria hissed, her professional demeanor cracking. "You people always think you're entitled to special treatment." The cabin went completely silent, A passenger in row 4 had already begun recording with his phone. In one swift, unthinking motion, Victoria's hand struck Elijah's cheek, the sound cracking through the cabin like a gunshot. "Know your place," she added, voice barely above a whisper. For 3 heartbeats, no one moved. Then Marcus Montgomery lowered his Wall Street Journal, revealing his face for the first time since Victoria had begun her tirade. Recognition dawned in her eyes, the same dark eyes as the young man she had just assaulted, the same distinguished features that had graced the cover of Forbes just last month. "I believe," Marcus said, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had intimidated boardrooms worldwide, "my son was simply asking for the service he paid for." Victoria's face drained of color as the passenger behind her whispered, "That's Marcus Montgomery, the Marcus Montgomery." The video was already uploading to social media, even as the plane cruised at 35,000 feet. What would you do if you witnessed racial discrimination on your flight? Comment number 1 if you believe Victoria should be immediately fired, or number 2 if you think she deserves a chance to explain herself. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you stand against racism in all its forms. The question remains, with a viral video spreading even before the plane lands, will justice be swift? Or is this just the beginning of a much bigger battle? This is unacceptable. Sky National Racism became the top trending hashtag on Twitter before the plane even reached Nevada airspace. The first video, captured by investment banker Kevin Zhang in seat 4A, had already accumulated over 50,000 retweets within an hour of being posted through the plane's Wi-Fi. Flight attendant slaps black first-class passenger for requesting service, then discovers his billionaire father witnessed everything. Sky National Racism, Marcus Montgomery. Victoria Winters had retreated to the galley, hands shaking as she scrolled through her phone, watching her career disintegrate in real time. 3 more videos from different angles had emerged, each capturing her slap and damning words with perfect clarity. Her phone buzzed with a text from Richard Whitmore. "What the hell happened? The CEO is calling emergency meetings. Do nothing." Until landing. In first class, the atmosphere had transformed. Flight attendant Zoe Chen, a 29-year-old Asian American woman who had witnessed everything, immediately stepped in to provide Elijah with impeccable service, her eyes communicating silent apology. Other passengers oscillated between uncomfortable silence and whispered commentary. "She's always been so professional with me," murmured an older white woman to her husband. "There must be more to the story." "I saw everything," countered a middle-aged black businessman from across the aisle. "That young man did nothing to deserve such treatment. Nothing." Marcus Montgomery made a single phone call, speaking so quietly that even Elijah couldn't hear the conversation. When he finished, he simply patted his son's hand and said, "It's being handled. Carson and the legal team will meet us at the airport." Victoria eventually emerged from the galley, her face a mask of professional contrition as she approached Elijah's seat. "Mr. Montgomery, I want to sincerely apologize for my unprofessional behavior. I don't know what came over me, and I hope we can resolve this situation amicably." The rehearsed words fell flat as Elijah regarded her silently. Marcus intervened before his son could respond. "Ms. Winters, I suggest you direct all further communications through our legal team. They'll be available upon landing." Victoria's practiced smile faltered. "Sir, I assure you this was an isolated incident. I've served your corporate groups many times with no complaints." "Have you?" Marcus replied, raising an eyebrow. "My executive assistant has documented 17 incidents of discriminatory treatment toward Montgomery Innovations employees of color on Sky National flights in the past year alone. Today, simply provided video evidence of what we already knew." The color drained from Victoria's face as she realized the depth of her predicament. This wasn't just about a moment of lost temper. She had assaulted the son of a man who had been building a case against the airline's discriminatory practices for months. 2 hours before landing, the captain's voice came over the intercom, unusually formal. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Reynolds speaking. I've been informed of an incident in the first-class cabin. I want to assure all passengers that Sky National takes allegations of misconduct extremely seriously. Upon landing, we ask that all passengers remain seated until certain individuals have deplaned first. Thank you for your cooperation. Zoe Chen leaned close to Elijah while serving coffee. I've seen how she treats passengers of color for 3 years, she whispered. Many of us have filed complaints. Nothing ever happens. Before Elijah could respond, she slipped him a business card with her personal contact information scribbled on the back. As the plane began its descent into San Francisco, Victoria received another text from Richard. Damage control protocol engaged. CEO statement prepared condemning the alleged incident. PR team advising standard suspension with pay during thorough investigation. Hold the line. We'll weather this. She allowed herself a small breath of relief. Richard had navigated similar PR crises before, though admittedly none quite this public or involving anyone as powerful as the Montgomerys. When the plane touched down, the true scope of the situation became apparent. Through the windows, passengers could see a swarm of reporters and cameras positioned near the gate. The captain made another announcement. Folks, it appears there is significant media interest in an incident aboard our flight. Sky National representatives will escort certain individuals from the aircraft first. We appreciate your patience. 2 airline executives in crisp suits boarded as soon as the jetway connected. They spoke briefly with the captain before approaching Victoria. Ms. Winters, you'll be coming with us through the rear service exit, one said quietly. Security is waiting to escort you to a private area. As Victoria was led away, she caught a glimpse of Elijah and Marcus being greeted by a team of sharp-suited individuals at the jet bridge. Carson Wallace, Montgomery Innovations' formidable chief counsel, was immediately recognizable from his frequent television appearances. Within 30 minutes of landing, Sky National Airlines released its first official statement. We are aware of a deeply concerning video circulating on social media showing an interaction between a Sky National crew member and passengers. The employee involved has been immediately suspended pending a thorough investigation. Sky National has zero tolerance for discrimination of any kind. Victoria sat alone in a sterile conference room at the airport, her phone confiscated by airline security, awaiting further instructions. Despite the gravity of her situation, a part of her still believed that this would ultimately blow over. After all, Richard had assured her that the airline would protect its own. She had no way of knowing that within her company, battle lines were already being drawn between those determined to make an example of her and those equally determined to shield her and themselves from the consequences of a culture they had carefully cultivated. Distinguished passengers, valued customers, and dedicated employees, Sky National Airlines stands firmly against discrimination in all forms. Charles Hawkins, the 60-year-old CEO of Sky National, delivered these words from a podium emblazoned with the company logo, his voice resonating with practiced sincerity. The disturbing video circulating online does not reflect our values or the exceptional service we strive to provide every day. We have suspended the employee involved pending a thorough investigation and will take appropriate action based on our findings. Behind the cameras and carefully crafted statements, a very different conversation was taking place in Sky National's executive boardroom. Richard Whitmore paced anxiously, his normally commanding presence diminished by the crisis unfolding on the wall of monitors displaying social media reactions, news coverage, and plummeting stock values. This is a containable situation, Richard insisted to the gathered executives. Victoria Winters has an exemplary 15-year record with us. One mistake, caught on camera without context, doesn't erase that history of service. A mistake? The question came from Amara Johnson, the recently appointed Vice President of Diversity and Inclusion. At 38, Amara had built her reputation transforming toxic corporate cultures. Her appointment 6 months ago had been Sky National's response to minor controversies. Now she faced a full-blown crisis. Richard, she struck a passenger while using racially charged language. That's not a mistake. It's assault with discriminatory intent. The Montgomerys are threatening legal action beyond just the assault, added Bradley Peters, head of legal. They're claiming a pattern of discriminatory behavior toward black passengers, particularly in premium cabins. Marcus Montgomery apparently has documentation of numerous incidents. Richard waved dismissively. Anecdotal complaints. Impossible to verify. We all know some passengers use the race card when they don't get upgraded. The room fell uncomfortably silent at Richard's comment. Amara's eyes narrowed, but before she could respond, CEO Charles Hawkins intervened. Let's focus on immediate action. The public statement buys us time, but we need a strategy. Richard, you've worked closely with Victoria. What's your recommendation? Richard straightened his tie. A standard 2-week suspension with pay during investigation. I'll personally review her record and provide context for the incident. Once the media circus moves on, we quietly reinstate her with mandatory sensitivity training. And if the Montgomery legal team doesn't move on? Amara challenged. Their foundation funds major civil rights litigation. This isn't going away, with a suspension and training video. Across town, Elijah sat in his father's San Francisco penthouse, surrounded by Montgomery Innovations' legal team. Despite the support, he felt deeply uncomfortable with the growing media attention. I never wanted to be the face of another racial incident, Elijah confessed to his father, as they reviewed the proposed legal strategy. I just wanted to fly home and celebrate my deal. Marcus placed a hand on his son's shoulder. Sometimes, we don't choose our battles, Elijah. They choose us. What happened today has been happening to our people for generations. The only difference is you have the resources to fight back. Carson Wallace, their chief counsel, interrupted respectfully. We've been monitoring Sky National's internal communications. Richard Whitmore is actively working to protect Victoria Winters. He's deleted 3 previous complaints against her from minority passengers. How did you get access to their systems? Elijah asked, shocked. We didn't need to, Marcus replied. 5 Montgomery Innovations employees filed formal complaints about Victoria Winters in the past year alone. Our legal team requested copies of those complaints last month as part of our diversity initiative research. Yesterday, when we requested them again, 3 had mysteriously disappeared from their records. Meanwhile, Richard Whitmore sat in Victoria's modest apartment, coaching her for the internal investigation. Stick to the script, he instructed. You felt threatened by his aggressive tone. You raised your hand in a defensive gesture that was misinterpreted on camera. Emphasize your exemplary record and express appropriate remorse for any misunderstanding. Victoria nodded, grateful for Richard's support but increasingly worried. The video clearly shows me striking him, Richard, and those awful things I said. Context, Victoria. It's all about context. We'll establish that you've been under exceptional stress. Flight attendant assault cases are up 300% post-pandemic. You've been working double shifts due to staffing shortages. You made a split-second error in judgment that doesn't reflect your character or our airline's values. What neither knew was that Amara Johnson had been quietly building her own file on discriminatory incidents at the airline since her arrival. She had reached out to Zoe Chen, who provided timestamps of at least a dozen incidents involving Victoria's treatment of minority passengers. More damning, Amara had discovered that Richard had personally intervened to halt 3 previous investigations into Victoria's conduct. 7 days into Victoria's suspension, Sky National's board of directors called an emergency meeting. The boycott threats had materialized into actual cancellations. Corporate clients, fearful of association with viral racism, were switching to competitor airlines. The stock had dropped 11%. The investigation is still ongoing, Richard reported confidently. But preliminary findings suggest this was an isolated incident by an otherwise exemplary employee during a high-stress moment. That's not what my investigation shows, Amara countered, distributing folders to each board member. I've documented 17 complaints against Ms. Winters in the past 3 years, all from passengers of color, all mysteriously resolved without action. 3 were completely removed from our systems after the incident. The boardroom erupted in shocked murmurs. CEO Charles Hawkins paled visibly as he flipped through the evidence. There's more, Amara continued. Our own exit interviews show a pattern of minority flight attendants leaving specifically because of hostile environments perpetuated by certain senior crew members and enabled by operations management. All eyes turned to Richard, whose face had hardened into a mask of defiance. This is a witch hunt, Victoria Winters is being scapegoated for structural issues beyond her control. The following morning, Sky National released a statement that shocked both the public and Victoria herself. Following our thorough investigation, Sky National Airlines has reinstated flight attendant Victoria Winters to active duty. While we acknowledge an error in judgment occurred, Ms. Winters' 15 years of service and clean record prior to this incident have been taken into consideration. She has completed intensive sensitivity training and will be resuming her duties effective immediately. The public backlash was immediate and fierce. Your boycott Sky National began trending nationwide. Civil rights organizations announced protests at major airports. The Montgomery legal team issued a simple but devastating response. Sky National's decision confirms what we already knew. This isn't about one employee, but about a culture that enables and protects racism. The reinstatement of Ms. Winters leaves us no choice but to pursue all available legal remedies. Victoria's phone rang minutes after the announcement. Richard's voice was triumphant. "We did it, Vicky. Now get back in uniform and hold your head high. This will all blow over once the next social media outrage takes over." As she hung up, Victoria felt a strange mixture of relief and foreboding. She had won this round, but looking at the continuing media coverage, she couldn't shake the feeling that her victory might be short-lived. What she didn't realize was that her reinstatement wasn't Richard's victory. It was his tactical error. By protecting her so blatantly against mounting evidence, he had unwittingly given the Montgomerys exactly what they needed to expand their case from an individual incident to a systemic failure. "This isn't just about me anymore," Elijah Montgomery declared, straightening his tie as he prepared for his first public statement since the incident. The gleaming offices of Montgomery Innovation's San Francisco headquarters offered a stark contrast to the storm brewing outside, where protesters carrying "Justice for Elijah" signs gathered in solidarity. After Sky National's decision to reinstate Victoria Winters, Elijah had spent 3 sleepless nights weighing his options. His father had offered the full might of Montgomery Innovation's legal department, but Elijah wanted to chart his own course. "If I let you fight this battle for me, Dad, it becomes about a billionaire's power, not about the everyday discrimination that people without your resources face." That morning, Elijah sat across from Maya Washington, a formidable civil rights attorney whose reputation for dismantling discriminatory corporate practices had earned her both admirers and enemies throughout corporate America. At 45, Maya had transformed from a firebrand young lawyer to a strategic legal mastermind who knew precisely how to make companies face their demons. "Sky National's reinstatement of Ms. Winters is actually helpful to our case," Maya explained, spreading documents across her desk. "It demonstrates that this isn't an isolated incident, but a systemic issue they're actively protecting. We don't just have a case against Victoria Winters. We have a case against the entire corporate culture." Elijah leaned forward, examining the files. "What kind of evidence are we talking about?" "Your father's team has already collected testimonies from 17 minority employees who experienced or witnessed discrimination. We have records of complaints that were buried. But to build a class action, we need more current employees to come forward." The challenge seemed daunting until Elijah's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This is Zoe Chen from the flight. Others want to talk. Need guarantees of protection. Job at risk." While Elijah worked with Maya to build their legal strategy, Victoria Winters returned to work amid a storm of media attention. Camera crews followed her from her apartment to the airport, where she was escorted through employee entrances by security. Richard Whitmore had arranged for her first flights to be on premium routes, with historically few minority passengers, hoping to ease her transition back. "Just keep your head high," Richard advised during their daily coaching calls. "The airline stands behind you 100%. What Richard didn't share with Victoria was the growing division within Sky National's leadership. Amara Johnson had refused to sign off on Victoria's reinstatement and had taken her concerns directly to key board members. The company's stock continued its downward trajectory as corporate clients quietly switched their business travel to competitors. 2 weeks after returning to work, Victoria arrived home to find her apartment door slightly ajar. Heart pounding, she pushed it open to discover her living room covered in printouts of social media threats, news articles about the incident, and one chilling note in red marker. "We know where you live, racist." Shaking, Victoria called Richard, who arrived with private security within 30 minutes. "This is clearly intimidation from those protesters," he fumed, photographing the scene before calling the police. "We'll add this to our countersuit for defamation and harassment." The police officer who responded seemed less convinced. "There's no sign of forced entry, Ms. Winters. Do you have security cameras in the building?" "Only in the lobby," she replied. "I'll check those, but without witnesses or evidence of how they accessed your apartment, this could be difficult to pursue." Victoria didn't miss the officer's skeptical tone or the way his eyes lingered on the social media printouts documenting her actions on the plane. The break-in at Victoria's apartment coincided with a major development in Elijah's case. Jason Reynolds, a 26-year-old black flight attendant still employed by Sky National, had reached out through Maya Washington's office. "Victoria Winters isn't the exception at Sky National. She's the rule," Jason explained during their confidential meeting. "Richard Whitmore has blocked every diversity initiative proposed in the last 5 years. Minority crew members are systematically assigned to less desirable routes, denied promotion opportunities, and subjected to higher scrutiny for uniform violations." Jason slid a flash drive across the table. "I've documented everything. Shift, assignments showing racial disparities, promotion records, even emails from Richard coaching Victoria on how to handle complaints from minority passengers." "Why are you coming forward now?" Elijah asked. "You're risking your career." Jason's expression hardened. "Because I watched that video of you getting slapped and realized I've been complicit by staying silent. I joined this airline to see the world, not to help maintain a system that looks like the 1960s. As Maya Washington's team began organizing evidence for a class action suit, Sky National's legal department approached Elijah with their first settlement offer, $2 million, and a non-disclosure agreement that would prevent him from discussing the incident publicly. "This isn't about money," Elijah told his father after rejecting the offer. "It's about accountability." Marcus nodded with pride. "You know they'll come back with more money. And I'll keep saying no." The situation escalated when a conservative news outlet published a supposedly exclusive story questioning Elijah's character. The piece alleged that Elijah had a history of confrontations and had been disciplined for aggressive behavior during his time at Harvard. The source was listed only as airline insiders familiar with the investigation. Maya Washington immediately issued a cease and desist letter, pointing out that Elijah had graduated with honors and had no disciplinary record whatsoever. "This is textbook character assassination," she told Elijah. "They're trying to change the narrative from racism to your supposed behavior problems." That evening, Elijah returned to his apartment to find his door vandalized with racial slurs. Unlike Victoria's break-in, this incident was captured clearly on the building's security cameras, showing 3 white men in hoodies who made no attempt to conceal their actions. "I'm hiring security for you," Marcus insisted after seeing the footage. "That won't stop them," Elijah replied, his voice weary but resolved. "Nothing will stop them except winning this case and forcing real change." The police classified the vandalism as a hate crime, but Elijah's building manager privately suggested that perhaps he should consider moving for the sake of other residents' safety and property values. The implication was clear. His presence, not the racism, was viewed as the problem. As pressure mounted from all sides, Sky National returned with a larger offer, $5 million, and a public apology that admitted no wrongdoing but expressed regret for the passengers' experience. The offer came with a 48-hour deadline. "They're getting desperate," Maya observed. "Our class action paperwork hits the court tomorrow with 12 current and former employees as named plaintiffs. Once that happens, no settlement with you alone can stop the larger case." Elijah stared at the settlement documents, contemplating the peace that accepting might bring to his increasingly complicated life. The media attention had begun affecting his work performance. Clients were more interested in discussing the incident than business opportunities. His social media accounts were flooded with both support and vicious attacks. For a brief moment, he considered signing. Do you think Elijah should accept the settlement offer? Comment number 1 if you believe he should take the money and move on with his life. Or number 2 if you think he should reject it and continue fighting for systemic change. Like this video if you've ever had to choose between personal peace and standing up for something bigger than yourself. And subscribe to follow Elijah's journey as he faces even greater challenges ahead. With threats escalating and personal attacks mounting, how far will Sky National go to silence him? And who else might be drawn into this dangerous conflict? I was terrified. Victoria Winters dabbed at her eyes with a tissue as television cameras captured her carefully crafted vulnerability. I've dedicated 15 years to serving passengers with dignity and respect. One moment taken out of context has destroyed my reputation and subjected me to death threats. The exclusive interview with National Morning News had been Richard Whitmore's masterstroke, a sympathetic female anchor, pre-approved questions, and a narrative that recast Victoria as the victim rather than the aggressor. Her honey blonde hair was styled simply, her makeup understated to emphasize her apparent distress. The video that went viral doesn't show what happened before, Victoria continued, her voice trembling perfectly. Mr. Montgomery had been increasingly aggressive throughout the flight, demanding special treatment and intimidating me when I tried to follow standard procedures. So you felt physically threatened? Prompted the interviewer. Absolutely. I raised my hand in what looks like a slap on camera, but I was actually trying to create distance in a threatening situation. As a woman working in confined spaces with sometimes hostile passengers, safety is always my concern. Behind the scenes, Richard watched the live feed with satisfaction. The narrative shift was already gaining traction, with sympathetic hashtags, like "Fwark Stand with Victoria" and "Hear Her Side" trending among certain demographics. Immediately following the interview, Sky National's PR team launched a coordinated social media campaign featuring testimonials from passengers and crew members praising Victoria's professionalism. None mentioned her treatment of minority passengers, and all featured white customers or colleagues. Meanwhile, a shadowy network of accounts began circulating doctored screenshots of aggressive social media posts allegedly written by Elijah years earlier. Though easily debunked, the fabrications spread rapidly through certain online communities predisposed to believe the worst about young black men who spoke up against discrimination. They're trying to drown out the truth with noise, Maya Washington explained to Elijah as they reviewed the latest developments. It's a classic playbook. Rewrite the narrative, attack the victim's character, rally support from those who share their biases. The counteroffensive extended beyond media manipulation. Richard arranged a private meeting between Victoria, himself, and Charles Hawkins, Sky National's CEO, in the company's executive dining room. The Montgomery case is gaining momentum, Richard explained grimly. 12 current and former employees have joined as plaintiffs, all claiming systematic discrimination. Charles Hawkins removed his glasses, pinching the bridge of his nose. At 60, the CEO had navigated numerous corporate crises, but none that threatened both the company's financial standing and his personal legacy so directly. "What's our exposure?" he asked. "Potentially hundreds of millions if it goes to trial," Richard admitted. The plaintiffs are seeking class certification that would cover all minority employees and passengers subjected to discriminatory treatment over the past 5 years. Victoria paled. "Would I be personally liable?" "You're named as a defendant along with Richard and the company," the CEO confirmed. "But Sky National will cover legal costs for all employees acting within their professional capacity." The implication hung in the air. If evidence emerged that Victoria had acted outside her professional capacity, she might find herself without corporate protection. Richard leaned forward, lowering his voice. "I have a solution. We offer a substantial settlement with ironclad NDAs. $20 million to Elijah Montgomery personally, another $30 million distributed among the other plaintiffs." $50 million, Hawkins exclaimed. "A fraction of what we'd pay after a public trial, not to mention the stock price recovery once this goes away. The key is separating Elijah from the others. Without the Montgomery name and resources, the class action loses its power." The CEO nodded slowly. Make the offer. And Richard, this stays between us. The board doesn't need details until we have an acceptance. That same afternoon, Victoria returned home to find multiple news vans parked outside her apartment building. Her neighbor, an elderly woman who had previously been supportive, handed her a petition signed by 12 residents requesting that she move out to restore peace to the community. The walls were closing in, despite the media narrative shift. That night, Victoria decided to take matters into her own hands. Using information from Sky National's passenger database, accessed through her employee portal against strict company policy, she began compiling personal details about Elijah, Montgomery's travel habits, frequent destinations, and the names of Montgomery Innovations employees who regularly flew Sky National. What Victoria didn't realize was that her database searches had triggered alerts in the airline's security system, logs that would later become key evidence in the expanding case against both her and the company. Across town, Elijah arrived at his apartment to find the lobby strangely empty. The security guard his father had hired was missing from his post. As Elijah approached his door, the hair on the back of his neck stood up. Something was wrong. The lock had been tampered with, the door slightly ajar. Drawing a deep breath, Elijah pushed it open to find his apartment ransacked. Furniture was overturned, his computer missing, and spray-painted across his living room wall were the words "Race Traitor" alongside a crude noose symbol. This time, the building's security cameras had been disabled 30 minutes before the break-in. The police detective who responded seemed genuinely disturbed by the escalation. "Mr. Montgomery, I strongly advise relocating to a secure location. This level of planning suggests serious intent." That night, Elijah moved into his father's heavily secured penthouse. As Marcus's security team swept the apartment for surveillance devices, they made a disturbing discovery. Elijah's phone had been cloned, giving someone access to his calls, texts, and location data. "This isn't random harassment," Marcus told his son gravely. "Someone with resources is coordinating these attacks." The breakthrough came the following morning when Maya Washington received an anonymous email containing internal Sky National communications. The sender identified themselves only as someone who can't watch this happen anymore. The documents included emails between Richard and Victoria discussing ways to neutralize the Montgomery threat, Victoria's unauthorized database searches for Elijah's personal information, and most damning, a message from Richard to a private security contractor requesting discreet surveillance of Elijah with the chilling instruction, "Find leverage. Everyone has secrets." When confronted with this evidence, Sky National's CEO Charles Hawkins realized the company had crossed into potentially criminal territory. He immediately contacted Elijah's legal team, offering not just financial settlement, but a complete leadership overhaul, starting with Richard Whitmore's termination. "Too late," Maya Washington replied coldly. "This case isn't ending with a settlement anymore. We're adding criminal intimidation, harassment, invasion of privacy, and racketeering charges. The Department of Justice has already been notified." That evening, as Victoria stepped out of an elevator into the parking garage beneath her apartment building, she was met by a man in a tailored suit who introduced himself as an FBI agent. "Ms. Winters, we have a warrant for your electronic devices in connection with an investigation into corporate conspiracy, harassment, and civil rights violations. I suggest you cooperate fully." Victoria's phone buzzed with a text from Richard. "Say nothing. Lawyer being sent." But as she looked at the agent's unwavering expression, Victoria realized that Richard's protection might finally have reached its limit. The fluorescent lights of the Sky National crew lounge buzzed overhead as Zoe Chen cleared out her locker. After 4 years as a flight attendant, her career had ended with a terse email citing violation of company confidentiality policies, a transparent excuse for her decision to document Victoria's discriminatory behavior. "I'm sorry about your job," a voice said from behind her. Zoe turned to find Jason Reynolds, the only colleague who still acknowledged her existence. "I'm not," Zoe replied, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. "I couldn't keep pretending this company values diversity while watching what really happens every day." As she carried her belongings through the terminal, Zoe's phone rang with an unknown number. The voice on the other end belonged to Maya Washington. Ms. Chen, your testimony could be crucial to our case. Would you be willing to meet? 3 hours later, Zoe sat in Maya's office, surrounded by legal assistants frantically taking notes as she outlined years of witness discrimination. It wasn't just Victoria, Zoe explained. The entire senior crew operated under unwritten rules about who deserved premium service and who didn't. Do you have documentation? Maya asked. Zoe nodded, producing a thumb drive from her purse. I've kept a detailed journal since my second year, including dates, flight numbers, crew members involved, and specific incidents. I also have photos of crew assignments showing how minority flight attendants were systematically kept off premium international routes. Maya's eyes widened as she reviewed the meticulously organized files. This is extraordinary, Ms. Chen. Why did you compile all this? My parents immigrated from Taiwan. They taught me to document everything because systems aren't designed to believe people who look like us. Zoe paused, her expression hardening. When I saw Victoria slap Elijah Montgomery, something broke inside me. I couldn't be complicit anymore. Maya leaned forward. You understand that Sky National will claim you fabricated this evidence after being terminated? Check the metadata and timestamps. Everything was documented in real time, long before the incident with Mr. Montgomery. As Maya's team began the painstaking process of verifying Zoe's evidence, Elijah arranged to meet her personally at his father's secure penthouse. Thank you for your courage, Elijah said as they sat in the sunlit breakfast nook overlooking San Francisco Bay. You've lost your job because of this. Zoe shook her head. I lost my job because I finally chose integrity over security. There's a difference. Their conversation was interrupted when Marcus Montgomery entered, his expression grave. Zoe, my security team has detected unusual activity around your apartment. Have you noticed anything suspicious? Someone followed me from the airport yesterday, she admitted. I thought I was being paranoid. Marcus nodded to his chief of security. Arrange protection for Ms. Chen immediately and prepare the guest suite. Zoe started to protest, but Marcus raised his hand. This isn't charity, it's practical security. Richard Whitmore has demonstrated he's willing to go to extraordinary lengths to suppress evidence. You're now a key witness in a case that could cost Sky National hundreds of millions of dollars. The wisdom of this precaution became evident that night when Zoe received an alert from the security system she'd hastily installed after being terminated. Someone had broken into her apartment. The security footage showed 2 men in maintenance, uniforms methodically searching her home, focusing on her computer, files, and even prying up floorboards looking for hidden storage. They won't find anything, Zoe told Elijah as they watched the footage from the safety of the Montgomery penthouse. Everything important is either with your lawyers or backed up to encrypted cloud storage that only I can access. Meanwhile, Victoria Winters found herself increasingly isolated as Sky National began distancing itself from her. Her scheduled flights were reduced and colleagues avoided her in crew areas. Richard Whitmore, once her staunchest defender, had stopped returning her calls after the FBI visit. Desperate for guidance, Victoria finally reached him at his home, late one evening. Richard, they're freezing me out. What's happening? The situation has evolved, he replied coldly. The company's legal position requires certain strategic adjustments. What does that mean for me? It means, Richard said, after a calculating pause, that you should retain independent counsel immediately. The company's attorneys will continue representing Sky National's interests, which may not always align with yours. The betrayal hit Victoria like a physical blow. After years of loyalty and following Richard's guidance, she was being abandoned, to face the consequences alone. That night, she made a decision that would alter the course of the case. The following morning, Elijah received a call from an unknown number. Mr. Montgomery, this is Victoria Winters, the voice said, tension evident in every syllable. I think it's time we talk directly. No lawyers, no company representatives, just us. Maya Washington strongly advised against the meeting, but Elijah felt compelled to hear what Victoria had to say. They arranged to meet at a private room in a downtown restaurant, owned by one of Marcus's business associates, neutral territory with discreet security. Victoria arrived, looking nothing like the confident flight attendant who had slapped Elijah months earlier. Her hair was pulled back severely, her face devoid of makeup, her posture defeated. "Thank you for agreeing to see me," she began, hands clasped tightly on the table. "What I did to you was inexcusable. There's no justification, no context that makes it right." Elijah remained silent, studying the woman who had unleashed a series of events that had changed both their lives irrevocably. "I've spent years cultivating an image, playing a role that Richard convinced me was necessary for advancement," Victoria continued. "Somewhere along the way, the role became real. I became someone I don't recognize anymore." "Why are you telling me this now?" Elijah asked, his voice carefully neutral. "Because Richard Whitmore is planning to offer you a deal. He'll take full responsibility for the company's discrimination policies, claiming he manipulated me and others into implementing his vision. In exchange, he wants immunity from criminal charges." Elijah's expression remained unchanged. "And you're warning me because it's another manipulation. Richard has been systematically destroying evidence and creating a paper trail that makes him look like a champion of diversity who was undermined by rogue employees like me. He's setting up fall guys while preparing his golden parachute." 2 days later, as if on cue, Richard Whitmore requested a confidential meeting with Elijah and Maya Washington. The operation director arrived with his personal attorney but no Sky National representatives. "I want to make things right," Richard Isa declared with practiced sincerity. "The culture at Sky National is my responsibility. I've prepared a full statement acknowledging my role in creating an environment where discrimination was tacitly encouraged and complaints were suppressed." Maya's expression remained skeptical. "And in exchange?" "In exchange, I ask only to be excluded from the criminal complaints. Civil liability, financial penalties, professional consequences, I'll accept them all. But at 62, I can't spend my remaining years in federal prison." What Richard didn't know was that Victoria had provided Maya with a recorded conversation in which he explicitly discussed destroying evidence and intimidating witnesses. The recording had already been provided to federal prosecutors. "We'll consider your offer," Maya replied neutrally. "Though I should mention that the FBI executed search warrants on Sky National's servers this morning. I suspect whatever evidence you thought was destroyed is currently being recovered by their technical team." The blood drained from Richard's face as he realized his carefully constructed exit strategy was collapsing. As he left the meeting, his attorney's phone buzzed with notification of a second search warrant, this one for Richard's home and personal devices. The following day, as Victoria prepared for her formal deposition, she received an unexpected delivery. A job offer letter from Montgomery Innovations for a position in corporate training, focusing on workplace culture and anti-discrimination practices. Attached was a handwritten note from Marcus Montgomery. "Redemption begins with accountability, but it doesn't end there. When you're ready to rebuild, this opportunity will be waiting." Victoria set the letter aside, tears streaming down her face. For the first time since the incident, she felt something she had almost forgotten. Hope. New evidence emerges in Sky National discrimination case. The headline blazed across screens nationwide as multiple videos from different passengers aboard the fateful flight surfaced, each capturing angles and moments that contradicted Victoria's televised account. One particularly damning clip showed Elijah calmly requesting service 3 times before the confrontation, debunking her claims of his aggressive behavior. Social media erupted with a dramatic reversal of public sentiment. The hashtag, Justice for Elijah, which had temporarily been overshadowed by Josh's stand with Victoria, surged back to prominence, accompanied by Boycott Sky National and Fly Something Else. TikTok user, Travel Truth Teller, a flight attendant from a competing airline, created a viral video breaking down the professional protocol violations in Victoria's behavior. Even if a passenger was being difficult, which the videos clearly show Elijah wasn't, physical contact is never permitted under any circumstances. We're trained extensively in de-escalation. What happened here wasn't a mistake, it was a choice. As public opinion shifted, former Sky National employees emerged from the shadows, emboldened by the growing support for accountability. Darnell Williams, a black flight attendant who had resigned 3 years earlier, posted a 10-minute YouTube video detailing his experiences. I was repeatedly assigned to the least desirable routes despite seniority. When I filed a complaint, Richard Whitmore personally told me to know my place, the exact words Victoria used when slapping Elijah Montgomery. Letitia Gomez, a former gate agent, shared performance reviews showing she had been penalized for lack of proper appearance when wearing her naturally curly hair, while white colleagues with dyed purple hair faced no consequences. There were different rules depending on your skin color, and everyone knew it. The testimonies kept coming, dozens, then hundreds of current and former employees sharing similar experiences across airlines, revealing an industry-wide problem that had remained hidden for decades. Maya Washington's office was flooded with calls from potential plaintiffs wanting to join the expanding class action. Meanwhile, investigative journalist Tasha Brooks published a devastating expose in The Atlantic titled "The Segregated Skies," revealing Richard Whitmore's 20-year history of discriminatory practices across 3 different airlines. The piece included internal memos where Richard explicitly discussed keeping certain demographics away from premium cabins to maintain the experience preferred by our highest value customers. As public pressure mounted, Sky National's stock plummeted by 23% in a single week. Corporate clients publicly announced they would no longer book with the airline until significant changes were implemented. The company's crisis reached new heights when the Department of Transportation announced a formal investigation into discriminatory practices. Through it all, Victoria Winters maintained a low profile, having been placed on extended administrative leave after her FBI interview. Despite the temporary reprieve provided by her televised interview, she now found herself increasingly vilified as more evidence emerged, contradicting her version of events. Richard Whitmore, however, seemed determined to maintain the illusion of business as usual. He appeared at Sky National's annual charity gala in a custom tuxedo, working the room with the same charismatic confidence he had always exuded. Few attendees realized they were witnessing his final hours as the airline's operations director. Among the glittering crowd, Victoria watched from the shadows, having arrived without an invitation. She had spent the past week providing federal investigators with details of Richard's systematic discrimination policies. Now, wearing a simple black dress instead of her uniform, she observed her mentor laughing with the airline's upper echelon, seemingly untouched by the scandal engulfing the company. Victoria approached a server for a glass of water, only to be stopped by a security guard. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but Mr. Whitmore has requested that you be escorted from the premises if you appeared." The humiliation burned through her as heads turned, whispers following her retreat toward the exit. Near the door, she nearly collided with CEO Charles Hawkins, who was engaged in intense conversation with several board members. "The independent investigation confirms widespread discrimination," one board member was saying. "We need to get ahead of this before the government forces our hand." Hawkins nodded grimly. "I've scheduled an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning. Richard Whitmore's employment with Sky National ends at 9 a.m. Victoria slipped away unnoticed, pulling out her phone to send one final text to Richard. "They're terminating you tomorrow morning. Board meeting at 9. Despite everything, she felt a strange obligation to warn the man who had shaped her career, even as he prepared to sacrifice her to save himself. Richard's response came hours later, after the gala had ended. "I've already negotiated my exit package. $50 million severance, lifetime travel benefits, consulting contract. Don't worry about me. Worry about yourself." The next morning, as Victoria watched the news from her apartment, Sky National announced a leadership transition. Richard Whitmore was stepping down to pursue other opportunities. The press release praised his years of service without mentioning the scandal or ongoing investigations. What the carefully worded statement didn't reveal was that behind closed doors, Sky National's board had voted unanimously to cooperate fully with federal investigators, providing unrestricted access to all records and internal communications. The airline's new acting operations director, Amara Johnson, the very woman who had been fighting against discriminatory practices from within. Victoria was contemplating this dramatic reversal when her phone rang, the U.S. Attorney's Office requesting her immediate presence for additional questioning. As she gathered her purse and keys, her building security system alerted her to a visitor. Through the security camera, she saw Richard Whitmore standing outside her door, his normally immaculate appearance disheveled, his expression thunderous. Victoria's finger hovered over the intercom button before she thought better of it, silently gathering her belongings and slipping out through the service exit. As she drove to the federal building, news alerts flooded her phone. Sky National Board announces independent investigation. Class action against Airline expands to industry-wide suit. And most alarmingly, federal agents execute search warrant at Richard Whitmore's residence. At that moment across town, Elijah was meeting with his growing legal team when Marcus entered with breaking news. Sky National's stock has fallen so far that they're vulnerable to acquisition. Several equity groups are circling, but I'm considering making an offer through our investment division. You want to buy the airline that discriminated against me? Elijah asked incredulously. Marcus's expression remained serious. I want to transform an airline with a history of discrimination into a model of inclusive excellence. Sometimes real change requires new ownership. As the meeting concluded, Maya Washington pulled Elijah aside. Victoria Winters has agreed to provide complete testimony against Richard Whitmore and Sky National. She's offered to meet with you again, this time with her attorney present. Elijah considered the request thoughtfully. Tell her I'll meet with her after she testifies. Her actions now don't erase what happened, but they do matter for what comes next. Have you ever witnessed someone's true character revealed during a crisis? Comment number 1 if you believe Victoria is genuinely remorseful, or number 2 if you think she's just trying to save herself now that Richard has abandoned her. Hit the like button if you've ever seen justice finally catch up to someone who thought they were untouchable. Subscribe to follow this story as we head toward the dramatic courtroom showdown where Elijah and Victoria will finally face each other, with the whole world watching. Will Richard Whitmore sacrifice everyone to protect himself, or will the entire system of discrimination finally be exposed for all to see? The federal courthouse in San Francisco stood imposing against the morning sky as crowds gathered outside, divided between supporters holding "Thoughts or Justice for Elijah" signs and a smaller contingent of airline employees concerned about their industry's future. News vans lined the street, their satellite dishes reaching skyward like metallic flowers seeking light. Inside courtroom 4B, Judge Elena Rodriguez surveyed the packed gallery with practiced neutrality. Montgomery et al. Versus Sky National Airlines, Richard Whitmore, Victoria Winters, and other defendants, the clerk announced, officially beginning the most anticipated discrimination case of the year. Maya Washington rose first, her tailored, burgundy suit projecting both confidence and gravity. Your Honor, this case goes beyond a single incident of assault captured on video. What Mr. Montgomery experienced was merely the visible manifestation of systematic discrimination that affected countless passengers and employees for over a decade. Sky National's lead counsel, Preston Matthews, countered with a strategy of separation. The company acknowledges serious failures in oversight and culture. However, the actions of individual employees, particularly Ms. Winters' physical assault, represent extreme deviations from company policy and training. The legal battle lines were drawn, the corporation attempting to isolate bad actors, while the plaintiffs sought to prove institutional responsibility. Victoria Winters entered the courtroom on the third day, escorted by her attorney but noticeably separate from the Sky National team. Once the airline's exemplary representative, she now sat alone, a visible island between opposing sides. When called to testify, she walked to the witness stand with rigid posture, her voice barely audible as she swore to tell the truth. Ms. Winters, Maya Washington began, please describe your training regarding passenger interactions, particularly concerning equal treatment regardless of race. We received annual diversity training, Victoria replied, but it was treated as a formality. The real training happened informally. Could you elaborate on this real training? Victoria's hands trembled slightly. Richard Whitmore conducted what he called service excellence sessions for senior crew. He never explicitly mentioned race, but he used coded language about passengers who truly belong in premium cabins versus passengers who might make premium customers uncomfortable. And how were crew members who followed these unofficial guidelines rewarded? With better routes, schedule flexibility, and promotion opportunities. Victoria paused, then added, those who questioned these practices found themselves assigned to less desirable routes or faced excessive scrutiny for minor infractions. Throughout Victoria's testimony, Richard Whitmore sat stone-faced between his attorneys, occasionally passing notes but never making eye contact with his former protege. When his turn came to testify, Richard presented a carefully crafted narrative of misinterpretation. Ms. Winters and others clearly misunderstood my emphasis on premium service, he insisted. At no point did I ever encourage or condone discrimination, based on race or any protected characteristic. Then how do you explain this email? Maya Washington displayed a projected message where Richard had written, too many non-traditional passengers in first class on yesterday's JFK route. Adjust upgrade algorithms accordingly. That referred to casual versus business attire, Richard claimed, though his discomfort was evident. The courthouse fell completely silent when Elijah Montgomery took the stand. Unlike earlier witnesses, he projected quiet confidence, his Harvard-educated articulateness belying the stereotypes Richard and Victoria had acted upon. Mr. Montgomery, Maya asked, prior to the incident with Ms. Winters, had you experienced discrimination on Sky National flights? Yes, though in more subtle ways, Elijah replied. Delayed service, skeptical looks when boarding first class, extra scrutiny of my boarding pass. Small incidents that individually could be explained away but collectively formed a pattern. And how did the assault by Ms. Winters affect you? Elijah took a measured breath. Beyond the immediate humiliation, it forced me to confront how privilege insulates some while exposing others. I grew up with certain protections because of my father's success, yet still face this public degradation. It made me think about those facing similar discrimination without resources to fight back. During cross-examination, Sky National's attorney attempted to minimize the incident. Isn't it possible Ms. Winters was simply having a bad day, and this was an isolated lapse in judgment rather than racism? Elijah's response resonated throughout the courtroom. When someone tells me to know my place while striking me, after repeatedly denying me the service freely given to white passengers, it leaves little room for alternative interpretations. As the trial progressed, security footage from multiple Sky National flights revealed a clear pattern. Flight attendants consistently provided slower, less attentive service to minority passengers in premium cabins. Employee records showed minority crew members receiving disproportionately negative performance reviews, despite similar customer satisfaction scores. Most damaging was Charles Hawkins's reluctant testimony that the board had previously been presented with discrimination complaints, but had classified them as customer service issues to avoid deeper investigation. The jury began deliberations after 3 weeks of testimony. As they filed out, Victoria Winters approached Elijah in the courthouse corridor. Security tensed, but Elijah signaled he was willing to speak with her. I want you to know, Victoria said quietly, that regardless of the verdict, I accept full responsibility for my actions. Nothing justifies what I did. Elijah studied her for a moment before responding. The most important thing isn't what happened that day, but what happens next. Not just for you or me, but for everyone who boards a plane expecting to be treated with basic dignity. Victoria nodded silently before her attorney led her away, both aware that their brief exchange had been captured by dozens of cameras and would likely headline evening news reports. After 4 days of deliberation, the jury returned their verdict. Judge Rodriguez scanned the document before addressing the packed courtroom. In the matter of Montgomery et al. Versus Sky National Airlines, the jury has reached a unanimous decision. The finding of liability was comprehensive. Sky National Airlines, Richard Whitmore, and Victoria Winters were all found responsible for discrimination, creating a hostile environment, and in Victoria's case, assault. The jury awarded Elijah Montgomery $2 million in compensatory damages and an unprecedented $48 million in punitive damages, specifically designed to force corporate change. More significantly, the class action portion resulted in a $300 million judgment to be distributed among approximately 22,000 affected employees and passengers, with specific requirements for Sky National to implement comprehensive reforms under federal monitoring. As Judge Rodriguez read the verdict, Richard Whitmore's expression darkened. His carefully constructed exit strategy had collapsed. The judgment specifically barred the company from paying any portion of his personal liability or providing the golden parachute he had negotiated. His $50 million severance was redirected to fund diversity initiatives within the airline. Victoria Winters received a mixed outcome. While found liable, her cooperation with investigators and forthright testimony led to significantly reduced damages. More importantly, she avoided criminal charges for assault in exchange for community service and participation in the company's reformation process. For Sky National, the verdict was simultaneously devastating and transformative. The financial penalties were substantial, but survivable. What couldn't be measured in dollars was the mandated overhaul of hiring practices, promotion policies, service protocols, and complaint procedures, all to be supervised by an independent monitor for 5 years. Outside the courthouse, Maya, Washington addressed the assembled media. Today's verdict isn't just about one incident or one company. It's about challenging the unspoken biases that shape our daily experiences in ways big and small. This case succeeded because brave individuals like Zoe Chen, Jason Reynolds, and dozens of others risked their livelihoods to expose the truth. When reporters pressed Elijah for comment, he spoke briefly but powerfully. Money doesn't erase discrimination. What matters is that institutional practices are changing, not just at Sky National, but across an industry that has normalized differential treatment. The real measure of success will be when flying, while black no longer comes with extra scrutiny. Back at Sky National headquarters, emergency board meetings stretched into the night. With stock prices plummeting and corporate clients canceling contracts, the company faced an existential crisis. CEO Charles Hawkins announced his resignation, acknowledging his failure to address discriminatory practices despite repeated warnings. In a stunning development, the board appointed Amara Johnson as interim CEO, the first black woman to lead a major airline. Her first official statement embraced the verdict. Today marks the beginning of Sky National's transformation. We accept full responsibility for past failures and commit to becoming the industry leader in equitable practices. For Richard Whitmore, the aftermath proved swift and merciless. Beyond the financial penalties, his professional reputation was destroyed. Former colleagues distanced themselves, speaking boards canceled engagements, and a criminal investigation into witness intimidation and evidence tampering continued to gather momentum. 2 weeks after the verdict, federal prosecutors announced charges against Richard for obstruction of justice, witness tampering, and conspiracy to violate civil rights. The indictment detailed how he had orchestrated the break-ins at Elijah's and Zoe's residences, authorized illegal surveillance, and deliberately destroyed evidence of discriminatory practices. Victoria Winters faced her own reckoning when she arrived at the predominantly black youth center, where she would complete 1,500 hours of community service. The skepticism that greeted her was palpable, but Victoria approached the assignment with unexpected humility. "I'm not here to be forgiven," she told the center's director. "I'm here to learn and contribute however I can." 6 months after the verdict, the transformation of Sky National Airlines had become a case study in corporate accountability. Under Amara Johnson's leadership, the company implemented what industry observers called the most comprehensive anti-discrimination framework in aviation history. The Montgomery Standards, as they became known, established clear metrics for equitable service, transparent promotion practices, and robust complaint investigation procedures. Most significantly, Sky National now published quarterly reports detailing customer satisfaction broken down by demographic markers, employee diversity at every level of the organization, and resolution statistics for discrimination complaints. Richard Whitmore's trial had concluded with a guilty verdict on all counts. The man who once commanded executive suites now faced 8 years in federal prison, his appeals already rejected by higher courts. His final statement to the court revealed his fundamental failure to comprehend the harm he had caused. I simply maintained standards of excellence that had existed in premium aviation for decades. For Victoria Winters, the path forward proved more complex. Her community service at the New Horizons Youth Center had evolved from reluctant obligation to meaningful engagement. Working primarily with teenage girls interested in aviation careers, Victoria found herself confronting the very biases she had once perpetuated. The industry will tell you there's a certain look that belongs in premium cabins, she told her students during a career workshop. That's precisely the thinking we need to challenge. Excellence in service has nothing to do with conforming to outdated stereotypes. Zoe Chen had found her voice as an advocate, accepting a position as executive director of the newly formed Aviation Equity Alliance, an independent watchdog organization funded partially by the Sky National Settlement. Under her leadership, the alliance conducted anonymous testing of airline services, published transparency reports, and provided resources for employees facing discrimination. What happened to Elijah Montgomery was extreme but not exceptional, Zoe explained during congressional testimony on airline industry practices. Our data shows persistent disparities in service quality, security screening intensity, and complaint resolution based on passengers' perceived race, religion, and national origin. Jason Reynolds and other plaintiffs from the original case had returned to Sky National under new leadership, many receiving long overdue promotions. The airline's proactive recruitment from historically black colleges and universities had begun shifting the demographic composition of its workforce, particularly in visible customer service roles. Most profoundly transformed was Elijah Montgomery, who had initially sought to avoid the spotlight, but now found himself the reluctant face of a movement. At his father's urging, he had established the Montgomery Workplace Dignity Initiative, a nonprofit organization providing legal assistance to victims of workplace discrimination who lacked resources to fight corporate giants. What we're building isn't just about diversity, Elijah explained during the initiative's launch. It's about recognizing that excellence thrives in environments where everyone is treated with equal dignity, regardless of appearance, accent, or background. Victoria had avoided any contact with Elijah since the trial, respecting his space while working to rebuild her own life. She had found modest employment as a customer service trainer at a hotel chain, where her experiences, both good and bad, provided valuable teaching material. Her attempt to publish a memoir about her transformation had been rejected by multiple publishers, most citing concerns about profiting from discrimination. Instead, Victoria channeled her reflections into developing training materials for service industry workers, emphasizing unconscious bias recognition and intervention strategies. The aviation industry as a whole had been forced to reckon with practices long normalized but newly scrutinized. Other airlines proactively implemented versions of the Montgomery standards, eager to avoid becoming the next Sky National. Passenger surveys across carriers showed marked improvement in equitable service, though advocates like Zoe Chen emphasized that data transparency remained crucial to sustaining progress. 1 year after the verdict, Victoria was completing her shift at the youth center when she looked up to find an unexpected visitor. Elijah Montgomery stood in the doorway, observing her volleyball game with teenage girls from the center's aviation program. "Mr. Montgomery," Victoria acknowledged, her composure momentarily shaken. "I wasn't expecting you." "I'm here to see the program," Elijah replied. "Your director tells me you've been making a real difference with these students." Victoria nodded, cautiously, uncertain where the conversation was heading. "They're teaching me more than I'm teaching them, to be honest." Elijah observed the youths packing up equipment, their easy interaction with Victoria contrasting sharply with the woman who had assaulted him. "People can change," he said finally. "Systems are harder, but they can change too if enough people demand it." "Is that why you're here? To see if I've changed?" "Partly," Elijah admitted, "and partly because my foundation is considering funding an aviation career path program here. Your director suggested you might have insights worth hearing." Victoria's eyes widened slightly at the unexpected opportunity. "I do have some thoughts, actually. These girls face barriers I never had to consider in my career." As they walked toward the director's office, Victoria ventured the question that had haunted her for months. "Have you forgiven me, Mr. Montgomery?" Elijah considered this carefully before responding. "Forgiveness isn't a single moment, Ms. Winters. It's a process that requires both accountability and growth. What you did was wrong, but what you're doing now matters too. That's the complicated truth of redemption." 1 year later, Elijah Montgomery stood at the podium of Montgomery Innovations' annual leadership conference, now heading the company's groundbreaking Workplace Dignity Initiative. The program had expanded beyond its original focus on discrimination to address broader issues of workplace culture, establishing benchmark standards adopted by corporations across multiple industries. "Transformation requires more than policy changes," Elijah explained to the assembled executives from companies worldwide. "It demands consistent commitment to examining our actions, assumptions, and systems, especially when they become so normalized we no longer see them." In the audience sat Marcus Montgomery, watching his son with undisguised pride. The experience that might have embittered Elijah had instead crystallized his purpose. Montgomery Innovations had become known not just for technological innovation, but for pioneering human-centered workplace practices that demonstrably improved both employee well-being and business outcomes. Across town, Victoria Winters led a training session for new flight attendants at Horizon Airlines, a regional carrier that had recruited her specifically for her perspective on service equity. Her presentation included the infamous video of her assaulting Elijah, a humbling but powerful teaching tool that invariably silenced the room. "That moment didn't define who I would become," Victoria told the trainees, "but it forced me to confront who I had allowed myself to be. The journey from that person to who I am today required honest self-examination and a willingness to rebuild from scratch." The airline industry had undergone its own transformation. Sky National, now operating under new leadership with Amara Johnson confirmed as permanent CEO, had rebounded financially after implementing the comprehensive Montgomery standards. Their marketing now proudly emphasized their equity commitments, turning what began as a legal obligation into a competitive advantage as passengers increasingly considered corporate values in their purchasing decisions. Richard Whitmore served his sentence at a minimum security federal prison, still maintaining that he had been scapegoated for industry-wide practices. His attempts to publish a memoir defending his actions had been rejected by every major publisher. His perspective, increasingly irrelevant to an industry moving forward without him. Zoe Chen's Aviation Equity Alliance had expanded to 15 staff members, conducting regular auditing of airlines' treatment of passengers and employees. Their quarterly report cards had become influential in both consumer choice and investment decisions, creating financial incentives for continuing improvement. "What began with a single incident has catalyzed industry-wide accountability," Zoe explained during a television interview marking the 2-year anniversary of the verdict. "We're seeing measurable improvements in equitable treatment, though. Vigilance remains essential to prevent backsliding." On a crisp autumn morning, Elijah boarded a Sky National flight from San Francisco to Chicago, where he would deliver a keynote address at a diversity leadership conference. As he settled into his first-class seat, he noticed the subtle changes implemented since the case. Flight attendants now greeted each passenger with identical phrasing and eye contact. Service procedures had been standardized to eliminate preferential treatment, and the crew notably reflected greater diversity than had been typical before. "Mr. Montgomery, welcome aboard," the lead flight attendant said, recognition dawning in her eyes. "It's an honor to have you with us today." Elijah smiled politely, observing how the attendant provided the same warm welcome to the elderly Asian woman behind him, the Latino businessman in 3C, and every passenger regardless of appearance. Small changes, yet profoundly significant in their cumulative impact. Later that week, Victoria completed her final hours of community service, though she had already arranged to continue volunteering with the aviation program she had helped build. The center's director presented her with a card signed by the students, many of whom had initially regarded her with suspicion, but now considered her a valued mentor. "You've completed your mandated service," the director noted, "but it seems you found something more meaningful in the process." Victoria nodded, thinking of the shy 16-year-old who had recently been accepted to a pilot training program with a scholarship from the Montgomery Foundation. I came here because a judge ordered it. I'm staying because this work matters. That evening, Victoria attended a charity fundraiser for aviation education programs, her first industry event since the incident. As she hesitantly entered the hotel ballroom, she spotted familiar faces from her former life, some who pointedly looked away, others who offered cautious acknowledgement of her presence. Then she noticed Marcus Montgomery across the room, deep in conversation with airline executives. When their eyes met, he gave a slight nod before continuing his discussion. Not friendship or forgiveness, perhaps, but recognition of her effort to rebuild with integrity. Near the event's conclusion, Victoria found herself alone at a high table when Elijah approached, 2 glasses of sparkling water in hand. He offered, one to her silently. "I saw your program received Montgomery Foundation funding," Victoria said after a moment. "The application was compelling," Elijah replied simply. "Results speak for themselves." They stood in contemplative silence before Elijah continued. "You know, when people ask about forgiveness, they often mean absolution, a way to leave the past behind completely. But maybe the better outcome isn't forgetting what happened, but carrying it forward as transformation." Victoria considered this. "I think about that moment every day. Not just what I did, but who I was becoming before someone finally held up a mirror I couldn't look away from." "And who are you becoming now?" Elijah asked. "Someone who understands that redemption isn't an event but a lifetime of choices," Victoria replied. "Someone trying to ensure the standards I help shape create space for everyone to be treated with dignity." As they parted ways, neither could have predicted how their unexpected collision would ultimately reshape not just their lives, but an entire industry's approach to human dignity. The incident that began with a shocking display of discrimination had catalyzed genuine, measurable change. 6 months later, Elijah boarded another flight, this time on a small regional carrier connecting to a remote community where Montgomery Innovations was supporting local entrepreneurs. As he settled into his seat, he noticed the flight attendant providing each passenger with the same respectful acknowledgement, regardless of appearance or seat assignment. When she reached Elijah, recognition flickered in her eyes, but she maintained professional composure while offering the standard greeting. It was only after completing her duties that she returned with a discreet note. "Mr. Montgomery, your work has transformed our industry in ways you may never fully see. Every day, in countless small interactions, things are different because you refuse to accept discrimination as normal. Thank you for your courage." A grateful flight attendant. Elijah tucked the note into his jacket pocket, a quiet reminder that transformation occurs not just in courtroom verdicts and corporate policies, but in thousands of daily human interactions, where dignity either flourishes or withers. The true measure of justice wasn't punishment, but the creation of a world where such incidents became increasingly unthinkable. A world they were all still building, one interaction at a time. This story illustrates how a single moment of discrimination can trigger far-reaching consequences that transform both individuals and institutions. Elijah's experience shows that having the courage to stand up against injustice, even when faced with intimidation and character assassination, can catalyze meaningful change. For Victoria, we see how biases can become normalized within workplace cultures until we no longer question our own behaviors, and how true redemption requires ongoing accountability rather than a simple apology. The case demonstrates that systemic discrimination thrives not just through overtly racist individuals, but through leaders like Richard who establish unwritten rules that others follow, and through bystanders who remain silent. Zoe and Jason remind us that whistleblowers often face significant personal risk, yet their courage is essential for exposing entrenched discrimination. Perhaps most importantly, the story reveals that meaningful change requires both individual transformation and systemic reform. While Victoria's personal growth was significant, it was the implementation of the Montgomery standards across the industry that created lasting impact. The transformation of Sky National shows that accountability, transparency, and diverse leadership can convert a discriminatory culture into one that values equity. Ultimately, this narrative teaches us that justice isn't simply about punishment. but about creating environments where dignity flourishes for everyone. Change happens not only through dramatic courtroom victories, but through thousands of daily interactions where people choose respect over prejudice, courage over compliance, and transformation over tradition. Have you ever witnessed discrimination and struggled with whether to speak up? Or perhaps you've been in Victoria's position, recognizing behaviors you need to change. Comment below with your experiences or thoughts on how we can all contribute to creating more equitable environments in our workplaces and communities. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and share it with someone who might benefit from these important lessons. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories that explore social justice issues and human transformation. Thank you for listening, and remember, true change happens when we have the courage to hold both ourselves and our institutions accountable.